Much time? Yep. Go live. Okay. You are live. All right. So I'm going to quickly test our live audio and then we can get started with the stream. We have one viewer, which is me. Pretty sure. We'll see how this goes. Or maybe it's you. One of us is the viewer.
Yeah, I can hear you. I'm on it right now.
All right. Can you hear yourself? Like a 30-second delay, I'm sure.
Yeah, there is. Yep, my audio is working. I'm off.
Sweet. Nice. And it sounds nice and loud. I like it. All right, Rob, tell us, what are we doing today? What am I throwing at you completely unprepared?
All right, yeah. So, hello everyone. Welcome to the 6th episode of the Royals and Rogues production review for our horror short film, Tycho Decay. Today, we were going to be going over the monuments, but we got a loop thrown at me, and we're actually going to be reviewing the most important part of Anne, her legs.
Yep.
Something that I didn't think I would ever have to say. In our previous video, we mentioned that she didn't have legs, but it turned out that Sam built some unbeknownst to us, and that is actually going to very much help us in a couple of our shots. So, Alec, break down. Start from first. You can show it off. That's fine. But then I want to go through like the decision making from not wanting legs to then wanting legs, and
Right.
how is that working and impacting it?
Yeah. So, essentially, the way this production went, I'm just gonna throw us in the corner here, and then I'm gonna share my screen. Screen one there. There we go. Make us, I guess, any larger. I could, but maybe I can't. There we go. So we started out not having any, because this is our finished model of Anne, right here, and the idea was, well, we never see her. If I go to our storyboards here, we never see her any farther than the waist, right? It never goes really below that in our storyboards. And so I was like, well, if we never really see below the waist, do we really need to do that? So I thought I was being smart by telling our production designer that was working on Anne to just leave off the legs, just design the torso up above, don't worry about it. And then, you know, you get the model and it's so cool, and you start playing with angles and you start doing different things, and then, you know, you realize the gun that she has is actually, you know, kind of large. And so we kind of ended up having to do this a lot, which is just like kind of cut her off at places where, you know, if we couldn't do a shot like this, you know, you sort of were really limited. But I was like, that's fine. We'll work within the scope. We both kind of talked about it, and we said, you know what, let's just move forward and deal with it like good filmmakers and work within our limitations. And then Samuel decided to go, oh, hey, guys, shortly after we did that stream or that video, we posted it, and like 3 days later, Sam messaged me. He's like, hey, man, I made some legs. I was like, what do you mean you made some legs? He's like, yeah, I got bored, so I was just modeling, and I made some legs for Anne. And so I was like, well, great. Now I had this tough decision to make with you, which is, you know, do you look a gift horse in the mouth? Like, do you look a gift? If someone gives you free legs, do you say thanks but no thanks? I don't think so. And so now we have legs. So Sam really gave this project legs, essentially. And now we can walk.
Almighty.
So that's the long and short of it. Is we have awesome people working on this short that, without me asking, without me saying anything at all, just decide to build legs. Now he was like, "You're gonna have to rig it up. You're gonna have to do the retopolization, all this other stuff, and texturing and all that." Which are the guys at Loose Studios did a really awesome job on matching the textures that we already had on the top part of this whole model, and they're in the process of finishing up re-rigging, essentially, just not too much, just getting things rematched and making sure there's no like clipping or breaking. That way she's ready to go to animation. So, and they should have an update. They should have an update for us next week, they said, but we'll see. No promises. Right. So yeah, that's essentially you know, where we're at now with Anne, and She now has her legs, a quick turntable, kind of the retopologized model, a little lower resolution, so that way we can animate it easier. Yeah, so we have legs. This is my notes on the legs as you're working on it. Yeah, so that's pretty much today's announcement. It's not
so
nothing too crazy, but
well, it's so this is interesting because I won't lie, the producer part of me, like project manager part of me
mm-hmm.
is like revolting and just like screaming scope creep
Mm-hmm.
over and over again, and I hate it.
Right.
Which isn't like, it's like good.
But is
There's
it
like
scope
that's a
creep if
good
it
thing.
was free?
But then you still had to do the extra work. We still had to have move some
Yeah.
help out. So there
A
is
little
there
bit.
is scope creep that goes with that, which is like, in my mind, I'm like, that's the worst lesson to ever
Yeah.
learn. But it is a good thing. I mean,
Yeah.
it does give you more freedom to have the ability to build shots.
Yeah.
It,
It's a bit
it
of a
is
white elephant, right? It's like this
it is
gift,
it
but then
is.
it's a gift that also like ends up costing you to keep
So,
running.
well, here's the thing, because I agree. I listened to. We have a interview coming out soon. Next week, I think next Monday it drops
Yep.
with Alex Sikorsky.
Yeah.
Sikowski.
Sikowski, I think.
And I've been listening through it because I'm the one doing descriptions and stuff and running through it. And one of the interesting things that he says that I 100% agree with is like, you have to have like a vision in your head of like what you want your shots like. It should all be planned out. Like the
Right.
more production, the more planning you do in the beginning, the better it is in the end. And you made a good point, which is like the difficulty with 3D is that you can kind of just mess around with that.
Yeah.
Like, oh, well, what about this angle or what about this? And there is a almost like that. I think that's a skill. That is a skill.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm not looking at gift horse in the mouth. I am thrilled that we have this, and I think that it will make it better. But in my mind, there is also that like, if I it's that producer side of like, if I'm throwing my money down on a project and then
Right.
they're like, oh, by the way, this is gonna we also need this. It's like, no,
Yeah.
I do not like that. I do not
So
like
yeah,
that.
I agree with you. I think in the long term, this actually might be really beneficial because a, it's a complete character, which is nice because we could do like full turntables and stuff like that. And we're trying to prove to people that we can design this stuff. But b, to kind of show how some of the sausage is made. I guess my hope with this is eventually to like, I have a little this to people. I have a little 3D printed Marmaduke here. And I'm hoping to be able to 3D print and like get a few things together that one day can be some products, some cool stuff for fans. And it's way better to have, because I was like, well, it's cool to have Anne, but she's just gonna have to be like a bust, right? Like waist up, like print,
Yeah.
and then she'll just be like a little statue. But it's way cooler to be able to have a full like posed character that you can, you could do different stuff with. And I plan also to make these characters and assets available to people because they're our own stuff, their own IP, right? So it's like way cooler to be able to give people, a full character that's like rigged that they can play with or use in their own projects rather than giving them like half a character, right? And so, and especially right now, we don't know, I haven't decided what like the price points or any of that stuff is. But if we do attach like a price point to it, it's way better knowing like it's a full character with legs and arms that now is a little more valuable than like here's half a character that you can buy, and it might be like a name your own price thing. We'll see. But so all that stuff I think is going to add up in the long run to be worth it. But like you said, there is this thing, and there's kind of two philosophies, and they're not it's not an either or thing. Right, it's like shades of how much weight you have on one or the other. But there's kind of two philosophies of filmmaking, which is the person that goes in to make a film who knows exactly what they want, right? And this is there's an interview with Samuel L. Jackson talking about Django, and he's like, it's pretty rare in the modern era of filmmaking to get something like a Django Unchained, where every shot is in the director's head before he gets to set. And he's kind of subtly talking about the Marvel movies, really. But what he's saying is most directors these days, what they're doing is they have a loose kind of idea of the scenes that happen, the sequence of events, and then when they get on set, they shoot for coverage is the term. And what that means is that we're going to shoot a bunch of different angles and a bunch of different takes and a bunch of different kind of, shots and sequences, and then we're going to assemble what we like best in post. And a lot of people really like that, and it sort of goes back to our video about, is there too much 3D, where I think the problem isn't, is there too much 3D, or is it wrong to make a decision on set when you see something magical? But the idea of going into making something, especially narrative, with a lack of a why, behind each decision you're making. Why should we put the camera here? Why should we put the camera there? I do think is a mistake that a lot of directors and producers are making, that I'm hoping to avoid. The hard part about that is you don't want to be so closed off that you don't get those happy accidents, right? There's plenty of times, and I think that's one of the biggest challenges about 3D and what 3D lends itself to in general is like, I can put the camera wherever I want, whenever I want, and so, when we're looking at this and leg thing, one of the things I had to ask myself was like, well, why would we add legs, right, versus not? And I think the why made sense, which is like all the reasons I just gave. I won't give them again. But I do see, like, you have to be careful. It's a really, there's a reason why the producers and studios do this, right? Like, it's a really tempting thing to do. It is, just shoot something and then be like, well, it'll be fine because we can assemble like an interesting story or interesting angles that make sense in post, because we have all the, and it's almost counterintuitive, right? It's like, well, why wouldn't you want to have as many options as possible, right? Like, as a creative person, that seems to make sense.
I think I could answer that though.
Yeah.
Because, well, you have to have a vision of what you want to make creatively. What type of story you're trying to tell. Who are your characters? I think that most people don't realize it. Constraints are actually what make conflict, and every story is about conflict. You want to have constraints, and that's constraints in real world too. Like, it's interesting that if you think movies are too long today, that's because the medium is the message, is
Right.
effectively it. Like, I remember people talking about, like, you look at the Little Mermaid remake live action. It's like 2.5 hours long, I think, if I remember off the top of my head. The original is 90 minutes, hour and a half. That's it. That's all you need to
Right.
tell the story. It's the same thing of, if you have the ability where the price, like, film forces you, because it costs money every time you're shooting a frame, because you have to physically have it developed and all that. There's a cost. The cost continually goes up. It's a much smaller cost when you don't have that. So I think that what happens is that you come in without a vision of what you're trying to tell, and then you go back and you're like, oh, well, we'll catch everything.
Right.
I don't think that allows for happy accidents. Happy accidents occur when you are within those constraints and you see something, you're like, oh, that's really good. Okay, we can use that, but you're still stuck within those. Okay, we have this shot that, we're doing the establishing shot, that we're going to go and do a close up, then a medium of this angle and this angle. If you're able to go and break the script down to that level, you as a director or a creator, you will know exactly what story you're trying to tell, and there's no waffling at that point. You've already done the work ahead of time, so that frees up your mind in the moment to go, oh, that's actually a really good oh, I kind of like that, or okay,
Right.
that kind of works, or that doesn't work whatsoever. You can within it say, oh, well, we'll adjust, the camera, to do a different shot, possibly, but that does take time and energy and so forth. So I think that the difference is that when you're doing 3D, you have to self-impose that. Like, it's a skill to self-impose constraints upon yourself and say, no,
Yeah.
this is what we're doing, this is how we're doing it. And like you said, happy accidents, like, oh, the legs actually appeared because someone built them just on their own volition.
Yeah.
Great, this is fantastic. That's a great thing. But it is interesting where it's like, every time, the Office is a great example. I remember listening to someone talk about how great The Office is, and the TV show, and it's amazing and blah blah blah. And it is. I've watched a couple seasons and I thought it was funny. But I also, stopped after a while.
Right.
And something they said is, they're like, I can't believe, like, people didn't make this in the past. And it's like, it's because they couldn't. Like, do you know how expensive it would be to shoot a TV show with all these cameras all the way around, with everyone ad-libbing?
Right.
Like the idea of just doing improv in front of a camera is insane in a world where you're using film only.
Right.
It's only possible with digital, or really, it's only possible when you have a lot of cameras that are much cheaper now than they were in the past. So that's kind of where I see it, is you have to have those constraints. That's
Yeah.
the only way to do it.
It's really interesting because there's a balance, right, of constraints where what you would say is like if you have too many constraints, like with the film situation, you can't even make the thing that you wanted to make, right? So it's like, we have too many constraints to make this thing, and there's always this desire, I think, and you see this with I think James Cameron and others, like, and Lucas, perhaps the difference between like 1, 2, and 3 and 4, 5, and 6, um, with this idea of like, okay, there's a amount of constraints, or even maybe even Lord of the Rings, like if you have certain constraints, they aid in the storytelling because you're forced to think creatively to find a solution. But if you have too many constraints, you end up not even being able to make the thing because you just can't be technically done, right? And
Yeah.
there's sort of this interesting dilemma the filmmaker has in any genre or
Are we
any
still full
medium.
screen?
No, we have her on our left here spinning,
Oh,
and
okay.
then the both of
Sorry,
us.
continue.
Yeah.
Continue.
What are you just seeing her?
No, I
Okay.
can see you.
Cool. I just have it up. It's fun. It's a fun little 3-shot. But when it comes to you constraints, you're like, oh man, if I didn't have any of these constraints, then I can make something better, right? There's sort of this belief that like, like maybe it's interesting, right? Because when you have Jaws and you have like, okay, we need to not show it so often because it's not super believable. I'm sure what Spielberg's thought at the time was, and I kind of know this from interviews and stuff, it was like, oh, but if only we could like make it better, right? Like, and then the answer though was like, actually, it's kind of better that you don't make it better and we just show it less, right? And it's sort of this problem I think we see happening with like the new Jurassic Park versus the old Jurassic Park, which I talked with Alex Sikowski with about. I mean, and that's like the new Jurassic Park. You kind of lose the sense of scale. You lose the sense of like how big and bombastic these are because you can put the camera anywhere and you can fly it around. So it's like, if you're locked to like a tripod type shot where you're like looking up at this thing and you actually built it to scale, well, then it's a really impressive thing whenever you see it. But now it's like not so hard to like fly a 3D camera, on an invisible, non-existent jib, like over the dinosaur, and then it's like, well, now it just looks like a top-down shot from this thing. You could, there's sort of this weird thing where we should almost never see like the top of these things. They're so big, but you can put those on yourself. You can artificially limit yourself, which would be like, I think they did a really good job with in the kaiju movies, right? With Pacific Rim, right? The first Pacific Rim versus the second Pacific Rim. And so the first Pacific Rim, like they limited themselves. They're like, no, we're only going to do a camera angle if we could actually pull it off. So it could be on a helicopter, but then it has to be moving like really only as fast as a helicopter could move around this character. And most of the time it's like it's locked off on the ground. And there's some amazing shots of you see it like stepping over you and you're like panning with it, trying to like, and it's how you would have to do it. So by giving yourself some limitations, you end up getting that balance. But it's hard because like I definitely fall in the category of somebody that would rather not have any limitations. Like I'm sitting here like, oh, I wish I could do an explosion. I wish this explosion was 3D, and I don't want it to be a 2D piece of footage that I'm comping in. I want to do it correctly. I want that light to affect the rest of the lights in the scene, without me having to like paint in all the lights, in post, and we're kind of getting there in a lot of ways, but it's hard because like, okay, well then what limitations should I put on, and where is it gonna where are the limitations gonna aid in the storytelling, and where is where are they gonna like take away from the storytelling? So it's always a balance that you have to like go through, and I think ultimately it's like if it serves the why. That's almost always my my measurement stick is like, is this serving our why? Is this serving, in the case of a character, it'd be their motivation, but the motivation of a story is the story's like reason to exist. Is this communicating better what I wanted to say, or is it taking away from that because I'm caught up in the spectacle?
Yeah, which is interesting because, well, because I don't, yeah, I don't know if I've come around to the idea of the rule of cool. I think that there's an idea though that spectacle can be a part of a entertaining
Right.
story, but it can't ever overwhelm. I don't know. I'm still always like, I'm not so. I see the idea behind it. It's the same thing as like thumbnails. Like thumbnails on videos should be cool. You're like,
Right.
yeah, okay. It's like, but that is like an impression as opposed to it's something that a story as opposed to a story that's being told to you, which is like, yeah, it's really, that's really cool, but it's that car looks really good, but the engine's falling out. It's like, okay, well, I'd rather have the engine
Yeah.
working and the car not look as nice long term. So that's kind of how I view it for
The
the relatability.
the rule of cool is interesting because it can cover a number of sins, but not all sins. And what I like to kind of use is like, you get you it's everything's about willing suspension of disbelief. And one of the things you're doing is you're building currency with your audience. The longer you have, like, with the ratio of cool to like good storytelling. So in my mind, you need to build up enough currency to then cash it in on something cool, which would be I would kind of say the first Lord of the Rings film is you're building currency, you're building currency, you're building currency, and then at the end of the film you have, not the end of the film, but in the second film, partway through, Legolas slides down a shield shooting arrows and launches the shield off like a skateboard into an Urukai's neck. And
You love that example.
it's such a horrible scene. It's such like an 80s like goofy action scene, and it's completely out of place in this fantasy, medieval kind of somewhat grounded world. And but it works, and it works because you've built up enough cachet, with your audience to then do that, right? You've worked long enough and hard enough to be like, okay, I can get away with this. And the same thing happens in the first Lord of the Rings, I think, when you have like the elvish girl, and she like calls in the waterfall, and the waterfall's horses, or the river, the flood, right? She unleashes the dam and it floods the Nazgul, and it's a bunch of horses.
Yeah.
That works because you've earned it. You've spent like literally half the movie up to that point building this, like, hey, this is a good story, these are good characters, you're invested in them. So then when they do something kind of crazy or goofy, you've earned it. And I feel the same way with a lot of things. I think Die Hard does this. I think a lot of movies like earn their, like, I jumped out the window with the fire hose and I'm going to use it to swing into another part of the building. And then there's movies that don't earn it, which would be like kind of the Fast and the Furious movies or the Hobbit movies, right? Where it's like, you haven't quite earned this like song and dance number by goblins, and it doesn't really like work in that sense, which is kind of funny too, because you'll notice in Lord of the Rings as well, like as the movies go on, they get more and more bold. Like by the third movie, like Legolas is sliding down elephants, and there's like all sorts of like very action film moments, the just over and over again. In that by the last one, like trolls are going down by the dozen, and like all of a sudden, we have all these moments with the ghosts like flooding onto the field and overwhelming stuff. You're just like, holy smokes, they have like essentially chemical warfare or whatever you want to call it.
What?
With like the ghost, it's essentially just like dropping a bomb and letting them just like wipe over your enemy. It's like, oh, it's not really like a battle where you're winning via skill, right?
Yeah, don't get me started on that.
Yeah, so I think it's earned. I think if you work at it, you can earn those moments, and that's how I view it. And with the rule of cool. And then some people get away with it. I think Terminator 2 might be not a fantastic movie.
That's a hot take.
But the rule of cool, James Cameron's got that rule of cool, man, for people that aren't me, and it works. They just go like, "Oh, dude, it's so good," and I'm like, kind of a goofy robot being goofy. But
I kind of prefer Terminator 1 over Terminator 2.
Yeah, Alien versus Aliens is the same story. It's like what I have a friend, and me and him, he and I agree that if James Cameron isn't the end of a series, he's the beginning of the end of a series. Like he gets his hands on something and it goes from being like a very deep, like thoughtful, interesting thing to being like an action film. And it's like, oh, instead of one alien, there's like 10 aliens, and they go down and there's a gianter alien that's even bigger, and like, and there's gonna be like a little girl in it, and they gotta save the little kid from the bigger, badder version of the thing from the first one. And the guy that was a bad guy in the first one is now the good guy. Well, everything I just said applies to both movies completely.
Yeah.
And then someone else gets it after James Cameron, and what are they left with? They can't go back to like the deep brooding. They have to make it even more bombastic, and so it's like it's over. So like you have something really cool and neat that people love for specific reasons. James Cameron gives it mass appeal and makes it popular, and then it dies. Like so. That's more or less my James Cameron summary.
So you're a big fan of James Cameron.
I love him. Yeah. I love his work, but what he does to franchises is not good.
Well, yeah, I don't know if I disagree with that, but
yeah.
Bringing it back though to the legs, I did have a question. So, do you think that the film itself, the short film, would be diminished without the legs?
Yes and no. This is my regular answer I give to you every time you ask a question.
Usually, yeah.
The film itself, I don't think would be. I think we could get
a great politician.
Yeah. I think we could get away. So I'm developing like a sore throat of some sort. I think we could get away with not having the legs in the film. But the reason for the film and the post life after the film would suffer. So the film doesn't exist just to be an artistic piece, and that's part of one of the problems we kind of have with the film. Yeah. Is it's trying to serve a lot of goals. I go back and forth if it's too many. The main one is to be it itself, is to get it done and get it out and to prove that we can do it. But as far as like proving a pipeline, getting the experience of doing something like this, where it's like, oh shoot, we need to augment a character. Do we have that ability? And then like I said, having the model be complete for the life after the film, for showing off the art and the characters and what we've designed and built. To me, that would suffer without the legs, right? It'd be like, here, I think a lot of people would be asking. I mean, that's what happened, frankly. Whenever I showed people they'd be like, where's their legs? That'd be like the first question I'd get whenever I showed the model off to friends and family and people. It'd be like, oh, it's really cool. Why isn't she done? Is she done? And I'd be like, yeah, it's done. We just aren't doing the legs. And they'd be like, oh, okay, that's weird. But I'm like, yeah, you never see them. And they're like, oh, okay. But, the fact is we are going to be showing off the models. We are going to be, excuse me, making them available to download. So we might need to wrap this up.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
Oh, man, I'm dying. All right. So, yeah, the film itself, no. The afterlife and everything surrounding the film, yes.
Yes. All right. Well, we can wrap it up with that then.
That sounds like a good point.
Choking it out.
Yeah, to stop.
But yeah.
And it's been long enough. We've been on for about 30 minutes. It's a good stretch for people.
It's a good meetup then. All right. So I think for the future, the goal is going to be the monument scene. Yep. Still going to put that one down, marking it down.
That's the goal. I think we should be good. I don't have another interview set up right now to take away from. Because we do have 2 videos that are going to be launching. It's the full interview and then a snippet of the interview. And I think they're going to be really, really awesome. It's one of my favorite interviews I've done. Not like all of them, but I think it's a really. You've watched it a bit, right? I think it's really good.
Was good. Yeah, I think it was an interesting discussion you guys had. That sounds good. All right, man. Well, let's go ahead and sign off.
All right.
We will meet and convene next week.
Peace. See you guys in a week, and maybe one day someone will actually watch live.
I hope not.
That's true. It's gonna put too much pressure on it. All right, adios. Ended.